you. So whenever you're ready, Chair.
All right. Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome everyone and call the meeting to order for Friday, November 17th, 2023. And I'm going to ask Claire to please do roll call.
Certainly. City of Auburn, Nancy Backus.
I am here.
City of Kent, Dana Ralph.
Good afternoon.
City of Burien, Colleen Brandt Schluter.
Good afternoon, all.
City of Covington, Christina Soltis is usually our representative. And we just learned she had her baby last week. So we are graced with City of Covington's alternate Councilmember Deborah Hartsock. So welcome.
Thank you.
And City of Des Moines, Tracy Buxton.
I am here. Thank you.
City of Federal Way, Brian Davis.
Hello, here.
All right, he's here. City of Maple Valley, Sean Kelly.
Honored to be here.
Welcome. And City of Normandy Park, Eric Zimmerman.
Hello, everyone.
Welcome.
Thanks.
City of Renton, Ryan McIrvin. Right, absent. And City of Tukwila, Cynthia Delostrinos Johnson.
Hi, everyone.
And King County, Sonari Marshall. And Sonari let me know she was going to be in and out of the meeting today. But Michaela Daffern, our staff work group member, is here also. All right, thank you.
Okay. So when we do roll call, that kind of lets everyone know who on the board is here, but we know that we have more people attending than just on the board. So I would love to have, let's see, I think we have a member of the advisory board as well. Kathy, would you like to introduce yourself?
I am Kathy Sisk, a member of the advisory board, live in Des Moines. Sorry for all the background noise, but happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy, and welcome, and thanks for the work that you do on the advisory board. And Claire, I know people move around on the screen, but I'm going to ask if you can call those from the staff working group and any others that are in attendance so that they can introduce themselves.
Certainly. Let's go. I'll start with folks at the bottom left of my screen. Nicholas.
Hi, Nicholas Matz, Community Development Director, City of Normandy Park, here supporting Councilmember Zimmerman.
Thanks. And how about Nicole?
Hello, happy Friday. Nicole Nordholm, City of Des Moines.
Marina.
Hi, everyone. Marina Hanson, Human Services Manager for the City of Kent.
Matt.
Hey, everybody. Good. Happy Friday. Matt Torpy, Community Development Manager, City of Maple Valley.
Laurel.
Hello, Laurel Humphrey, Legislative Analyst, City of Tukwila.
Angie.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Angie Mathias. I work for the City of Renton, and I'm here supporting Ryan McIrvin.
And Michaela.
Michaela Daffern, King County, and I am here taking notes for Sonari, and she will be here shortly.
Thank you. And for the record, I just want to show, I see that Councilmember Ryan McIrvin did join. Welcome. And did I miss anyone for introductions? I think we got everyone.
All right. Let's move on to public comment then. This is the place on the agenda for public comment, and if you'd like to make any comments, please use the raise hand function at the bottom of your screen. And when you are called upon, you will have 3 minutes to make your remarks. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Do we have anyone online that would like to provide public comment?
Yes, Chair, we have one member of the public, and I will bring in Robin Garcia now.
All right.
And then also for your awareness, we do have one public comment that was submitted via email, and we did share that with the board this morning. You should have an email in your inbox at 8:12 a.m. from the info@skip.org account. So I'll move Robin in now. All right, Robin, trying to unmute you.
Unmute.
There you are.
I'm going to start over then. I'd like to comment about the projects that are being considered for funding today. I urge all of you to consider the impact on the public schools and public safety when looking at the larger volumes of housing with higher needs. These projects will bring zero funding to our schools at a time when school districts are looking at funding cuts. It would be better if we had workforce type housing for young workers or those attending college. One of the projects planned for the 272nd Park and Ride will be located near a planned property involving the multi-service center and a large number of housing units and families. This would be impactful because of the tax exemptions. Another project at the Kent Des Moines Road sounds like it might involve special needs, which often requires extra support in the school that comes unfunded to begin with, due to lower funding for special education coming from the federal government than what we should be getting. This would also be impactful because of the tax exemptions. While Open Doors and Mercy House projects might have a good reputation, the impact will most definitely be greater due to the schools and public safety when looking at larger volumes of housing with higher need. These projects will bring zero funding to our schools at a time when school I already read that. I'm sorry. I switched pages. I think I've just repeated myself. I'm sorry. I was looking at something online. These properties are also on a border between cities and can often draw on services clear at the edge of town. They may not be available or might pull away from the need in the local centers of town. This can have a huge impact. I urge you to consider the smaller, less impactful projects. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any other hands raised. Claire, am I missing anyone?
I don't see any other hands raised.
All right. All right, we will conclude public comment and move to the approval of the October 20th, 2023 minutes. Is there a motion?
So moved. This is
Thank
Tracy.
you. Thank you. We have a motion to approve by Tracy. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Second by Dana. Is there any discussion? Right. All those in favor of the approval of the minutes of the skip meeting for October 20th, 2023, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed, please say no. The minutes are approved as submitted. Next, let's see. I don't believe we have any agenda modifications. Is that correct, Claire?
That's correct. There's no modifications.
All right. We will move to briefings. The first one that we have today under item 5 is financing, acquisition, and preservation of affordable housing. And today we will continue our conversation from September with the King County Housing Authority, one of our region's experts on maintaining long-term affordability and permanently preserving affordable housing through acquisition and rehabilitation. This is the second in a two-part series from KCHA. Today's presentation will focus on how the organization finances acquisition and preservation in addition to the current constraints and opportunities in South King County. Claire, I'll turn it over to you for introductions.
Thank you, Chair. So to refresh the board's memory, in this year's SKIP work plan, and next year's as well, you have prioritized developing sub-regional affordable housing preservation strategies. As part of that topic, we invited KCHA to come and present on their important work with acquisition and rehab, especially in South King County. Today's presentation will focus on how they finance the preservation work, which has implications for us as we explore funding preservation projects and consider potential sub-regional policies. So with that, I'm excited to welcome back Andrew Calkins, VP of Policy and Intergovernmental Affairs, and Tim Walter, Senior VP of Development and Asset Management. In addition, we have Robin Walls, President and CEO, joining today. So with that, welcome Andrew, Tim, and Robin, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Claire. Thanks for having us back. I'd love to be able to share a presentation on the screen. Claire, I think I need permission from you to do that.
Yeah, Dorsal, are you able to give Andrew permission? Thank you.
There we go. All right. Hopefully you can see that just fine.
Looks good.
So yes, thank you for the opportunity to return and continue our conversation on acquisition and preservation of affordable housing in South King County. Wanted to start just by kind of reminding us what we covered last time and set us up for what we hope to talk about today. In September, we talked a lot about our different acquisition and preservation strategies. Kind of on the one hand, contrasting strategies to acquire properties that have existing affordability covenants or restrictions on them, and also properties that really look more like just naturally occurring affordable housing operated by the private market that we look to purchase and preserve as affordable housing as well. We talked about our strategy, which is really acquiring larger multifamily properties for the most part, and looking to grow that affordability over time. As an owner without a profit motive, the longer we can hold a property, the more opportunities there are to pay down the debt and keep it affordable over time. And we kind of ended talking about the challenges of financing this work. And that's what we want to focus on today. How do we go about making some of these larger acquisitions that we take on pencil? And what are some of the considerations that we think the SKHHP board should be thinking about if you would like to continue to support this work in the future? So we're going to focus on the financing, but also our CEO Robin's joining today and wanted to provide an opportunity for her to speak with you. From her perspective, she joined the Housing Authority last July. And we're super happy to have her. So I wanted to turn it over to her just to give her perspective on some of our work happening in South King County.
Hi, good afternoon. Robin Walls, excuse me, CEO for KCHA. So, you know, when Andrew and Tim talked to me about the work that you all were doing in the presentation last time, I wanted to bring forth and really talk about the KCHA's tradition and history, where we have really focused, and we're in a pretty unique position amongst housing authorities, in a sense of really having such a well-defined and developed acquisition and preservation strategy that has really set KCHA apart amongst housing authorities. There have been a few, and I'll talk about the Salish Place apartment complex that we acquired in King County in 2021 in a few minutes, and it's really a hallmark of a KCHA strategy in the sense of it is it's a property that is mid-size, and for us mid-size in the sense of that it consists of 136 units. It's a family type housing property that is a mixture of 39 one-bedrooms, 47 two-bedrooms, and 53 bedroom units. And so with having that number of 53 bedroom units in a property really allows us to be able to house pretty large families. So very important for us there. We also, that property is located within 3/4 of a mile of a future Kent Des Moines light rail station. And so it's very transit oriented, and with our workforce property, That is one of the things that we really look for, is for it to be within where there will be where there will be light rail expansion, or in certain cases where the light rail currently exists also. So, but we're really looking for transit-oriented development. And the other part of it that is really important to us is, as far as the preservation aspect of it is concerned, is that it continues to allow, and as Andrew mentioned a few minutes ago, since we do not have that same level of profit motive as private realtors, we are able to keep our rents reasonable and affordable. When we increase our rents incrementally, I just worked through it this morning, a lot of our budget discussions. And again, we're very modest in terms of our rent increases, where we're only increasing our rent by 3%, which is what we've historically done. And rents are currently approximately at 50% of the area median. One of the things that this market has also allowed us to do is to continue focusing, and by this market, I mean our current interest rate environment has allowed KCHA to continue to focus on acquisitions of properties like the one that we just talked about in Des Moines and other parts of South King County as well. We are pretty much at close for a property in Kent that we will be announcing very shortly with the purchase, as long as nothing goes wrong at the last minute. And that again is a really fortunate part of what we're able to do, and continuing our work. So thank you for having me, and I look forward to working with you all in the future.
Thanks, Robin. So keep this Salish Place property in mind, because we'll kind of use it to talk about some of the financing examples. I'm getting a ping. So kind of transitioning to the financing piece. And for today, really going to focus on the strategy we talked about last time, kind of looking at privately owned properties where we're really competing with the private market when it comes to trying to purchase these and keep them affordable. So to kind of ground us a little bit, as I mentioned, when we're looking to acquire kind of one of these larger multifamily properties, we're competing against what a private purchaser would pay. And we've seen costs grow over the last decade. This orange line on this chart kind of shows a 3-star kind of garden style property, kind of typical of what we would usually acquire. These have more than doubled or tripled in price on average in the region over the last decade. And still, we still think it's a cost-effective strategy, though. Even if you're looking at one of these properties kind of in between $250,000 or $300,000 per unit that you're paying for, that could be potentially half of what it would cost to build kind of new 2 or 3 bedroom family type housing, which could easily cost $500,000 to $600,000 per unit. So costs are growing. It's more costly here in our region than it is elsewhere in the country, but still, relative to new construction, a pretty cost-effective way to preserve housing. And when a private purchaser or a housing authority like us or another nonprofit's looking to acquire a property, just wanted to talk through some of the main financing sources. And for us, and also for a private purchaser, the single largest source of potential financing is always going to be the debt that we can finance based on what the tenants there at that site are paying. The key difference is that a private purchaser and real estate investors typically are bringing along their own equity and cash and that of other investors to the table to pay for a property, so they may not have the same need for debt as we may. Housing authorities under state law can go out to the municipal bond market and issue tax-exempt bonds. This is an advantage we have. The revenue we're able to generate from these bond sales are usually the single greatest source of funds we have to make acquisitions work, and we'll talk about how we can size those. Us and other affordable housing organizations also have access to other resources as well, and the biggest one is going to be the low-income housing tax credit, which sometimes can be used to do kind of an acquisition preservation project that also includes a substantial rehab component. But the reality is that there is so much demand for the tax credit program, as we've talked about previously, that it's just really a tapped out resource and very hard to use for this purpose at this point in time. That could, of course, change in the future. And then other kind of sources like the State Housing Trust Fund, local sources from SKIP, for example, would be another way that a property could be financed. But we'll talk about kind of how big these numbers are. Generally, kind of these other sources, you may get a few $1 million here that can be helpful, but there's going to be a need for other sources and strategies as well. So kind of take away from all this, so the biggest source of financing that we use when we're doing a purchase like this is the tax exempt bonds, kind of going out and using debt to finance these properties and paying that down over time. I'm going to transition over to Tim to kind of talk about the mechanics of how this all works.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. And again, we appreciate you having us back today and the opportunity to talk about kind of the Housing Authority's preservation strategy. And I'd like just to kind of reiterate, like we talked last time, that one of the reasons that the preservation approach has been so critical to us is we recognize that it's so difficult to kind of build new housing and to stay ahead of the curve of the housing need. But what is really happening in the backdrop is rents have been going up so fast over the last 15, 20 years in our region that the loss of affordability has been even greater than what we can build ourselves out of. And so as part of that, we have been striving to identify apartment complexes that are generally family-sized units, relatively modest apartments, the kind that if you were going to move into a community, you would be happy to live there yourself, but also ones that are going to be generally more affordable to a working class household in that neighborhood. Those are the ones that we're hoping that as we've acquired them, they become assets for those communities in perpetuity. Not just 40 years like the tax credit program that at the end of 40 years, they're going to have to buy it back when the covenants come off. But as a public body, these are permanent assets for these communities that we hope will not only provide housing for the next near term, but we also tend to look for those properties that have lower density, knowing that over time, 20, 30 years from now, as the debt gets paid off on these properties and land is free and clear, these become opportunities to redevelop and actually add even more units and to create opportunities in our communities where the land has been paid for in great locations. These are things where more housing can be developed at a cheaper cost than would ever have been, be able to do at that time. So these are not just near-term opportunities to preserve housing. They're also very, very long-term opportunities to ensure that affordability is permanent and that there are growing opportunities for housing, in our region in the future. So with that, excuse me, being the backdrop, part of our challenge is that we compete, as Andrew said, with the private sector, and so if a property is on the market, or in many cases, we've tried to buy properties before they go on the market and reach out to owners who may not be right at the point of being interested to put their property up for sale, but at least want to have that conversation so that we can, talk with them when they are ready. So here's an example. This is similar to the Newport Apartments in Des Moines that we talked about. It's since we've renamed it Salish Place, 136 units. This property was coming on the market a couple of years ago, end of 2021, for about $37 million. And the way that properties price, and this is how we have to look at them, because unfortunately, it's difficult for us to say, well, we're willing to pay X. We have to really be able to pay what the market would pay, because there's no seller that's going to sell to us for less than what they could get on the market. So what is shown here is when we looked at the property, Salish Place, the current rents were probably about $400 on average below what someone who wanted to come in could probably have pushed those rents to. And that's what we see in a lot of these naturally occurring affordable housing. Sometimes you've had longer term owners who just haven't pushed rents. And these privately owned complexes actually are providing fairly affordable housing for the neighborhoods. And as regulations have become more difficult, it's become more difficult for people to want to own or operate property. Or owners are just looking to recognize their, value of their investment. They're looking at selling. Well, anybody who's coming in and acquiring property, they've got a big price tag to pay, and they're going to find themselves in a position of needing to raise rents to finance their cost of acquisition. So an investor is going to look at it and say, okay, well, maybe this is where rents are $1,600 a month, but I know that I could push rents. I could do some modest investments. We could put new paint and carpet. We could put new countertops, and we could move rents up, on turnover or at the end of the current lease term by another $400. So this is how an investor is going to look at it. They're going to look at the market. What could the market support? So in this particular property, it could support rents about $2,000 a unit, less your operating expenses. Kind of shows what your NOI or your cash flow is. Now, you do have some amount that you would need to set aside for long-term improvements, but the private sector, always, understates what that number is. But in this kind of scenario, we knew that a private sector would look at this property, or private investor, and assume about a $2 million a year cash flow. That's what they would have to work with. This is like a business. You're buying a business, and this is the revenue stream that business can throw off. In markets, properties sell on what's called a cap rate. A cap rate refers to the capitalization rate, and that's essentially what the investment rate of return is. A property is just an investment. It's a real estate investment. And what kind of return is it going to throw off? And based on the different markets, real estate in our area has generally been anywhere from a 3.5% in a really tight market up to a 5.5% or 6% return. In this particular case, we knew that in Des Moines around this time, the cap rate would be, or the investment rate of return an investor would require, is about a little over 5%, or in this case, about 5.4%. So that's about where this was. The property was coming on the market at $37 million. $37 million an investor would look at and say, okay, I could generate a $2 million cash return on this, and that would be equal to about a 5%, 5.4% return on my investment, or this would be a 5.4% cap rate. We knew that based on the current operations and the current rents at about $1,600 a month on average, and with a little more that we would need to realistically set aside for repairs and improvements, we're not going to generate $2 million of cash flow on this property. The property in our operation might generate closer to 1.3 million, 1.2 million. And that's an important distinction. That's part of our preservation desire, is we want to come in. We know rents are likely below market at this property, or they're relatively affordable. And our goal is to figure out how can we acquire the property and try to keep rents as affordable as they are, so that they're affordable to the families that are living there now and at the time, and continue to be affordable. And then how are we going to finance that? What's that gap or that nut that we have to crack? So in this particular case, you can see, while from a market standpoint, we might have been able to push rents significantly, we come into it looking at what is the market willing to pay? What does the market think they're going to do? Okay, this would be support a $37 million market purchase. We're going to, though, only estimate that the cash flow that we have to work with is what the property is generating now, about 1.3 million. So, which is about a 3.5% return on an acquisition of that size. Andrew, could you go to the next slide? So when we look at something like that, we're going to say, the NOI, or the revenue, the cash flow, that's what that business, that's what the property has to throw off. That can be used to help pay for the acquisition of the property. That's one of the best things about preservation. It comes in with a built-in stream of revenue from day one to be able to help finance that acquisition. And everybody's aware that interest rates have gone up significantly over the last couple of years. So what we wanted to show by illustration here is, when we're looking at a property, we're also having to be mindful of what's the current interest rate environment we're in. What can we borrow money at? The higher the cost of our debt, the less we can afford to leverage or borrow with the revenue stream that we have. So in this particular scenario, you could see with cash flow or net operating income of about 1.3 million on a 6% 35-year loan, we could support about 20 million in debt. At 5% interest, almost 23 million. And at 4%, close to 26 million. So it's a $6 million swing on what we could leverage just based on interest rates. So that becomes an integral part of what we look at. But the part is that we then end up having to try to solve for is, okay, we know how much we can finance, but there's still a portion of the purchase price that we can't support with the debt. And how much is that? And how do we finance that piece? That's the part, that's the gap, that's the piece we're trying to solve. So in this scenario, again, what Andrew, who put the slides together, has demonstrated is that at 6% interest, our gap would be about 16, 17 million, with a little bit lower interest rate, 14 million. And at 4%, closer to 11 million. And you can see at the bottom of the page, what that reflects is, if we have to figure out how to pay for a 16 million, a 14 million, or a $10.8 million gap, if we had to borrow that money ourselves and cover that, how much would, we'd either have to come out of pocket. That's what an investor might do. They might roll a property from another sale and use the equity to cover their down payment. Maybe they've got investors who are willing to put cash down, but somehow we need to cover that gap. And for us, the way that we would look at financing these at the Housing Authority is we're not able to come out of pocket with that kind of cash, and there's not enough soft funding sources to come up with those kind of numbers for gap financing. And so we tend to look at trying to borrow that money and then pay for that gap over time. And so that's part of our strategy, is to reduce the out-of-pocket today by borrowing that gap difference, not coming out of pocket to pay the whole gap, but borrowing that. And then using properties that we have actually acquired 10, 15, 20 years ago that can now support a little bit more debt on from those properties to help cover the shortfall that the properties today can't carry. And we hope that that will continue. In 10 and 15 years from now, properties we're acquiring today will be able to either have their debt reamortized, or they would be in a position to help carry a little bit of debt service that a new property we'd be acquiring then would not be able to cover. So as we talked about, our very first thing in terms of the gap is we strategize to figure out how do we balance the risk, to us and to minimize that gap. Historically, it's been cheaper to borrow money on short term than it is longer term. And so even though we might borrow money on a 35-year amortization, meaning that if the loan was completely paid off, paid down, it would be paid to zero over 35 years. We might also borrow money on a 35-year amortization, but it actually has to be paid off in 10 years. That's called a bullet maturity. So we may borrow a 6% or a 35-year amortizing loan that is due in 10 years. Now, if it's due in 10 years, the way that the market works is we would pay essentially an interest rate that is equivalent on a 10-year loan. So maybe for a 10-year loan or a shorter term loan, 4% is the going rate. For a 35-year loan, fully amortizing, maybe that's 6%. Generally, it's been higher the interest rate for the longer amount of time you're borrowing. So we may be willing to take on the lower interest rate, knowing that in 10 years we might have to refinance. But who knows in 10 years? Would interest rates be 8%? There's some exposure. Is our interest rates really great? And we could borrow money at 4% now for 35 years. We're going to want to lock that in and get lock in that rate as long as possible. So we're always trying to figure out what is the right risk exposure with all these pieces to reduce that gap. We also talked about that the primary way for the Housing Authority is we've built a large portfolio. We have close to 6,000 apartments now of workforce housing. And those properties, every month that we have them, we've paid down the debt. 1 month's worth of debt. And I mean, we've all been in this business, some of us longer than others, but you know, the days are long and the years are short. And so you kind of blink and all of a sudden 5 years has gone by, or 10 years. And in terms of our preservation strategy, properties that we've had for 5 or 10 or 15 years that have become seasoned, they can actually carry a little bit of debt. We don't push rents on those properties, but they can often carry a little bit of debt that we can allocate to those properties. So they become a resource for us. It becomes a growing resource over time. And you don't develop that opportunity if you never start. And so that's where, while properties are more expensive today than they were 15 years ago, in 30 years from now, we'll be looking back 15 years saying, we wish we had done more 15 years ago, you know, because things are just going to continue to become more expensive. One of the other strategies that the Housing Authority has is, as a municipal body, similar to cities, as a municipal body, we've been able to get a municipal credit rating. So we actually have a AA Standard & Poor's credit rating. And so when we go out to finance properties, we're able to go out and actually issue bonds similar to this city, a county, similar to the state, and use the credit worthiness of the Housing Authority, using the revenue of the property or the properties in a pool that we have as kind of the source of repayment. And because we are a public agency, we're able to borrow money on a tax-exempt basis. There is no limit on the amount of tax-exempt bonds that housing authorities are allowed to have access to. It's not like private activity bonds in the tax credit program that each state is allocated a certain amount. Housing authorities are public bodies similar to cities and counties and states that have the ability to borrow money that's essentially more based on either a debt capacity or what they can afford to repay. And then lastly, there are sometimes other opportunities to pursue. We've used the transit-oriented development funding from the county on occasion to help finance some of our acquisitions that have been very, very close to some of the new light rail stations. And we've also had the opportunity to work with both Amazon and Microsoft to try to take advantage of some below market financing from them that is time limited, but anything that we can borrow on a below market rate just helps reduce the gap for us. Those are more the exception than the rule. So just very quickly, here's another example. This is a property called the Riverstone Apartments. This is in Federal Way, and it's right along the 272nd, so it borders Kent and Federal Way on the west side of the freeway. This is a property that is literally, you can throw a baseball and hit the new light rail station. And we acquired this property a couple years ago, but 3 and 4 years ago before that, once we knew where the light rail station was going, we were in contact with this ownership group to see if they would be interested or willing to sell the property, because it's been our experience that as these light rail stations have come into play and are close to high capacity transit, as those stations open, the rents around those stations just skyrocket. So the time to try to acquire and preserve those are before the stations actually get built out. And so the owner was not even willing to talk with us for a couple of years, but fortunately, after about 3 years of bugging them, they were willing to have a real conversation with them, and we were actually able to negotiate an off-market purchase of this property. And we thought that this is a very, very strategic location and one that will not be able to be replicated in the future. It's the largest, closest apartment complex essentially to this light rail station. So in this, we ended up paying a little over $70 million for the property. Property could support at the time about $50 million in debt. We were able to get some TOD funding to help support the acquisition of around $10 million for the acquisition, which is 1% interest only. And that left a gap for us of about a little under $12 million. And at the time when we borrowed that money, we had about a $650,000 a year gap that the property itself could not cover. All things being equal, a $70+ million acquisition, 308 units of family size housing across the street from a future light rail station that will provide excellent access to jobs and transportation at a price that was less than half of what it would have cost to have built that property from scratch for $600,000 a year, that we were able to figure out another way to cover, was able to secure and preserve that property. So there are ways to, that is a lot of money, but in the scheme of us and the work that we're doing collectively as a regional approach to this, this is a relatively small amount to pay for preservation of this size. Andrew? Yep. So, and I think I'll turn it back to Andrew here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. And we'll just wrap up here real quick. You know, we haven't talked about kind of affordability levels so much, but just, and it's much more complicated than this kind of simple visual illustrates, but just wanted to think about, for purposes of this, you know, how much debt could be leveraged by different rent levels and different AMIs. You know, when we go into a typical property, like some of the ones we talked about today, we're typically going to be around that 60% AMI range. The financing you're going to need on a per unit basis could be around $60,000 per year. If you're financing in a similar way as we've talked about. If all of a sudden you had to go down to 50% AMI and kind of restrict those rents further, you'd be looking at a much greater financing need. So just want to illustrate kind of, you know, our strategy of growing affordability over time rather than maybe instituting it immediately when we buy it, because as Tim talked about, you know, those rents and that NOI is the main thing we have to finance the property at the end of the day. And so restricting that inevitably restricts how much money we can raise. And so then just a couple takeaways, and then happy to take any questions. As you've heard from us today, you know, we really think and kind of are appreciative of SKHHP's, you know, focus on acquisition and preservation work. We definitely think this is a cost-effective strategy and something that really needs to be part of regional and state and national affordable housing conversations. Tim talked about kind of how, you know, the importance of making the investments we can today as well, right? The more we can do today, the better off we'll be down the line, and nothing gets cheaper, as we've learned. And then, you know, one of the reasons we gave a few of the examples today was just to illustrate just the size of that gap amount that's needed to do some of this work, and how important kind of interest rates and some of these different financing vehicles are. So really encourage, you know, SKHHP to, and we're happy to work with you on this, kind of regional and statewide funding mechanisms that could help make some of this work possible, because it's not easy to do. We have some things we can do that make it a little bit more easy for us, but you know, those opportunities are typically few and far between and becoming harder and harder to use. So very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. Tim or Robin, feel free to jump in if you have anything else, but I'm happy to take questions if there are any.
All right, thank you, Andrew, Tim, and Robin. Thank you so much. Questions? It looks like Tracy has a question. Please go ahead.
Well, I want to thank you. That is a lot of information, and but it generated a series of questions that are designed to help me understand better. I apologize for my kind of maybe lack of understanding of how King County Housing Authority interacts with an agency like SKHHP. So feel free to, if somebody else raises their hand in the middle, break me on these questions here. But so starting kind of in the middle of your presentation, talking about that gap, right? You talked about this gap. It sounds more like what a private homeowner would bring to the table would be capital or equity. So, and you talked about then what you do with that is you get a loan. Okay, so you can bond, but you can't bond for 100% of it. So you have to bring in something to cover the gap. Is that what you're saying? You can't bond for 100%?
Yep, that's absolutely right. Typically,
Okay.
based on what's the rents paid when we buy it, you can typically finance maybe 50, 60, 65% of the property on a good day.
Okay, so if you can only finance 50%, then your gap is 50%. And somehow you have to come in. So did you say that then what you do is you go and maybe borrow on the equity of some of the properties you already own? Is that what you said? Okay. So, in order to use revenue to pay debt on, okay. So do you refinance or just finance the equity on other properties? Either one. Okay.
We've done both, actually.
Okay.
And we've set it, borrowing in the tax exempt municipal bond markets actually provides government bodies for quite a bit of flexibility. And so we've actually structured some of these financings so that bond issues that we've done in the future are structured so that we can actually pledge those revenues to future acquisitions. So there's some,
you don't leave anything free and clear then. You just you've got to keep all your equity at work is kind of what you're saying. Or do you actually try and pay something down to free and clear?
We have been more the former than the latter. We have been using the equity to try to continue to expand at this.
So you you borrow against some equity, put it in some kind of interest-bearing account so that it's immediately, you can liquidate that immediately and use it if you need to. You don't have to wait to go fill out paperwork and get financing someplace. It's kind of what you're saying. You've got this pool of money.
Yeah. Well, we have actually, what we didn't talk about is we have development lines of credit that we have where we have funds on hand that we can borrow to take down a property. And then we will, over the course of 12 to 24 months, refinance those off of our lines of credit.
Got you. Okay. So let's see. So this gets a little bit closer to Skip. How is, for example, how does an agency like Skip interact? And this has to do with my lack of understanding about governments and municipal agencies. How is King County Housing Authority, is it just funded through county resource and bonds? Like when you read about you guys, it says you operate on rents, but then you also operate on bond resource. Is there any other resource like taxes from King County taxpayers?
No.
No. So then are you saying that an agency like Skip, which is funded by taxpayers, can come in and help that gap?
Yeah, you are actually more in a lender type role.
We would be a lender.
A gap help in a role to help identify how can that gap be funded. And so the ability to find ways to help nonprofit or other entities that can acquire property to minimize the gap, to understand how can they use debt to minimize the gap, and then what are tools that could be used to help address that gap, finance that gap. I think that's a role for Skip.
So if we were to partner with you, that's possible, right? The kind of agency we are and the kind of agency you are as like a quasi municipal agency, we can grant to you to fill the gap, or we have to loan to you to fill the gap?
No, you could grant.
Either one, and it's not, and that's totally allowed under both of our governmental structures.
Well, absolutely. As a matter of fact, under state law, the Housing Cooperation Statute, the state encourages cities and counties to partner with and fund and provide funding for, and actually provide waivers from building regulations and other things to encourage or allow for a housing authority to have affordable housing in their community.
So could you say it, like sum it up this is all, it's all gelling in my mind, but could you sum up a statement or 2 sentences, 1 or 2 sentences that would help to say to somebody who's saying you're double dipping, you're both government agencies funded by taxpayer dollars, and you're saying, no, King County Housing Authority isn't.
Correct.
So can you help say that, like maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, that like boil it down for your plain average citizen, kind of like me?
Okay, well, I guess I'm not quite sure what you mean by double dipping, in that both of us are looking at ways of preserving affordable housing and are bringing the tools and resources we have together to make that possible. The Housing Authority does not have a revenue stream, we don't have taxing authority.
But Tracy, they're not King County government. They're
Right.
named King County Housing Authority because of their location. They are not part of King County government.
Even though the executive appoints the commissioners. So the executive appoints the commissioners, but somehow the formation of the authority granted that permission, but it's not, but there isn't revenue that comes. I'm actually just repeating something that another elected was like kind of badgering me about, right? So I want to have a good answer for this. And so it's helping me to understand. I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, so housing authorities are similar to cities or utility districts. We have our own statute under state law. We are governed under state law. We were created in 1939 when the county determined that there was a need for a housing authority in the county. And there's some statutory, as to how housing authorities are established, either as a city housing authority or a county housing authority. We've been a long time. Our board is essentially approved by the council, but that is really the extent of our relationship in terms of the county. We are not a division of the county. We're not funded in any way from the county. Housing authorities are traditionally administer federal programs. That's historically been the majority of the work that housing authorities did, and we administer the Section 8 program in the county, Section 8 rental assistance program, as Andrew talked about last time, and also public housing that we own, that was paid for by the federal government essentially, where we receive a federal operating subsidy to operate those housing. Some of the housing is in South King County. Quite a bit of it is in South County. King County Housing Authority, though, has also gone out on its own and tried to develop more affordable housing that is more kind of workforce. We don't receive any federal subsidies for this, and we use the rents essentially as the source of revenue to finance the work that we're doing. When we started doing this, we could actually borrow money cheaper than the return on the property. So we could actually finance 100% of an acquisition just based on the rents. We can't do that anymore, and so we've had to become more creative, and we've had to look at using other properties that we have as a source of a revenue stream to help cover the shortfall for some of these acquisitions.
Robin, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, and Tim got there, but I think that what I just want to add to it is that for a part of Tracy's question, and particularly like with the role of county government, et cetera, that it's really the distinction between our federal programs and the governance and how we administer our federal programs versus, for all intents and purposes, what we're talking about here today are our private market programs. They're almost 2 distinct business lines, if you want to look at it that way. And so we're talking about like our gap financing, which, by the way, you hit on the head. I know you said you didn't feel comfortable with it, but you understood it. It seemed to me. But that's really about our private market program that is not designed, and it's not a pass-through in terms of our funding, like with the traditional programs that Tim mentioned. And so the relationships, like with respect to the county council approving and everything, that's all about how we administer and serve as stewards for the federal traditional programs.
I am understanding now. Thank you. And thank all of you for your patience with me here. So what you're saying is we could, if we decided, partner with you on projects, if that's what Skip decided they wanted to do. Okay.
Yeah.
And I'll jump in. So yeah, and KCHA could apply, to the Housing Capital Fund, that we put out, and if they have a particular project in mind, that's where I think, at least right now, seems the most obvious place that we could plug in is providing funding for a project.
Other questions? What a great report. I don't have it in my packet. It may just be that it wasn't printed. For me, is that presentation available? And it's just not in my packet, I'm assuming.
Yes, Chair, we'll send that out after the meeting today, and that'll be posted online as well for the public.
Perfect. What a great presentation. Tim, Andrew, Robin, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for being here to update us, educate us, enlighten us on all of that work and how we might be able to partner in the future. We're all in this for the same reason. So we really do appreciate your time today, last month, I believe it was, and all that you do. Thank you so much.
Well, we're grateful for the work that you're doing and coming together, to address this.
Thank you. All right, we'll move on to item 6. That's board business. And it's the 2023 SKHHP Housing Capital Fund recommended allocations. This is an exciting opportunity for us. So, less than a year ago, we adopted our first funding recommendations, and here we are again. Some of that work is already being done in South King County. I'm just so proud and just honestly kind of giddy when I think about where we are in a relatively short amount of time. So today we're going to take an opportunity to look at the impact and improve the lives of residents by providing some of that essential funding for some projects. I am going to turn it over to Claire for those recommendations and background. Claire.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree, this is an exciting day. And I'm thrilled to be able to tell you that the SKHHP Advisory Board has completed their review of 6 applications submitted to SKHHP's 2023 Housing Capital Fund, and that I'm here today to present their funding recommendation for your consideration. So your agenda packet contains a memo which details the Advisory Board recommendation, and your agenda packet was sent to you on November 9th at 5:57 p.m. from me. You can also view that memo in your calendar invite. So let's jump in. So we have 3 goals for today under this agenda topic. First, we'll review the Advisory Board's funding recommendation. Second, we'll review the projects and the funding rationale and recommended special conditions. Third, I'll be seeking a final recommendation from you, the Executive Board, which either concurs with the Advisory Board or amends the recommendation. So to briefly review our timeline, after the Executive Board adopted the funding guidelines for the 2023 SKHHP Housing Capital Fund back in July, we opened the application window and accepted proposals through September 15th, along with scheduling pre-application meetings during this time. On October 5th, the Advisory Board reviewed applications we received, including a summary of each project. At last month's Executive Board meeting, we did a similar exercise of reviewing each project at a high level. And at the November 2nd Advisory Board meeting, we reviewed each project again, and a funding recommendation was developed with unanimous support. So my hope is that today you will be able to finalize a funding recommendation that I will then seek concurrence on from all of the funding member city councils over the next several months. So when the projects were presented to the Advisory Board, there were several items that they considered. In addition to the recommended funding amount, they were asked to discuss their rationale and any special conditions on the grant or loan they wanted included. And as the administrator of the contracts, they also supported my ability to add the standard and special conditions based on the most up-to-date information. So they understand that by funding a project that's applying to other funders as well, SKHHP funds serve as a green light for that project and says to those other funders that this is a priority for South King County. So project readiness was a consideration, and we presented the findings of third-party construction reports on the 4 new construction projects. The advisory board considered how well aligned each project was with those SKHHP priorities that you adopted through those funding guidelines back in July. And they understood the importance of preservation at this moment in time. We've talked a lot about it at the board level. And I know your jurisdictions are also invested in that as well. So they understood that that's a high priority right now for the executive board. And I've mentioned this before to you, but I requested that they limit their recommendation to 3 or 4 projects, given the limited staff capacity for managing these contracts. So there's also no requirement that all the funds be spent. So new information has been received or calculated since our last meeting. We received third-party construction reports on all 4 new construction projects and shared those findings with the advisory board and also incorporated them into the memo that's attached to your agenda packet. Based on last month's meeting, there was a request to calculate the per unit cost using only residential costs of a project. So that number is also included in your memo. And I took that request a step further and calculated the square footage cost of each of the housing units based on size so that you can see the actual cost of the studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. So shortly after the advisory board made their recommendation, I noticed that there wasn't a line item for contingency funding or cost overruns in the multi-service center's revised budget that they submitted to us on October 25th. So after talking with several people in the affordable housing finance industry, a 15% contingency for rehabilitation projects is standard in our market. And because of this new information, and because SKHHP is the only funder the applicant applied to, I'll be recommending that the board consider adding the contingency onto the advisory board's recommendation. So this would total $777,306 sourced from the Substitute House Bill 1406 funds. And we will look at that a little closer in a few slides. And since our advisory board is comprised not only of passionate community members of South King County, but also subject matter experts employed by organizations affiliated with affordable housing production and preservation, there were a few disclosed conflicts of interest that I want to bring to the board's attention. So first, 1 member disclosed early on that she would need to abstain since she is employed by a project sponsor. So one of the applicants, she is a part of that organization. So that member did not participate in the evaluation of the projects, nor did she vote on the final recommendation. And then 2 additional advisory board members had potential conflicts of interest. They are both employed by separate organizations that discussed opportunities to collaborate with a project sponsor with EcoThrive on their limited equity cooperative model. These members participated in deliberations and voted on the recommendation. The disclosures happened prior to the vote being taken, and the conflicting transactions were unrelated to the matter being voted on. So with those potential conflicts of interest disclosed to you, let's move on to those funding recommendations. All right, so the advisory board recommends funding for 4 projects totaling $5,645,918. And of this total, the advisory board recommends using $675,918 of the total $928,812 sourced from Substitute House Bill 1406 revenue contributions for 1 preservation project and $4,970,000 sourced from House Bill 1590 revenue contributions for 3 new construction projects. This recommendation leaves a balance of $252,894 in the Housing Capital Fund in Substitute House Bill 1406 funds and $485 in House Bill 1590 funds that will roll over into the next funding round. So you can see on the table, the advisory board recommends funding the Mercy Housing Northwest project in Kent at the full request amount of $1 million. The Lehigh Skyway Affordable Housing and Early Learning Center project in unincorporated King County at their full requested amount of $2.8 million. The TWG Pandean at Star Lake in Kent at a reduced amount than they had requested, totaling $1.17 million. And to fund the Multi-Service Center, or MSC's Victorian Place 2 in Des Moines, which is a rehabilitation project at $675,918. So I thought it would be helpful, to go through each project, just to kind of refresh your memory on these, so you have a better awareness of what you're going to be voting on and deliberating over. I'll just jump right in. It's going to be a pretty high level overview, but I think you'll have the information that you need to make a decision. So first is the Kent Multicultural Village. It's a 199 unit multifamily rental project in Kent, adjacent to the future Kent Des Moines Link Light Rail Station, which is scheduled to open in 2026. The project will support households earning 30% AMI to 80% AMI, with a 20% set aside, that's 39 units, for households with an intellectual and/or developmental disability, or IDD. The IDD units will benefit from on-site supportive services. And a 30% set aside, that's 61 units, will be for families with children. And the project includes studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and 3 bedroom units. The site is comprised of 8 stories and will include a community center, a family resource center, and a licensed early learning facility with 6 classrooms to accommodate 96 infants and children, with a focus on serving children with IDD. And yes, Dana, I see your hand is raised.
Thank you. I just want to, for full transparency, and I think I might have mentioned this at a previous meeting, this drawing here is one of the earliest drawings that was submitted. This project does not look actually much like this at all anymore. And that community center sort of is potentially going away. There will be some retail there on 236. The housing itself, number of units is still pretty consistent. Just, I don't want anyone to be surprised when they see that this is not what's being built. So, and Nancy, I know you guys have been talking about this at Sound Transit as well. So just want everyone to be aware, like I said, the makeup of the housing, and it is, the bulk of it is in the 30 to 50% range is the last thing that I did here. And again, on-site services, absolutely just not in this format, and that community center portions of it will be a little bit of retail.
Thank you. And yeah, when if this is a project that the executive board supports and funds, we would get updated drawings and renderings and present whatever is the most up-to-date information to all of the funding councils. Thank you for that.
Eric?
Yeah, in our bylaws, is it okay for me to ask Mary Ralph what you'd like us to do with this?
I can certainly, so we are very supportive of the housing portion of this project. There's still a lot of work to be done on how it is laid out on the site and what it looks like in relationship to the station. Nothing that I have not said to them and to Sound Transit. I'm frustrated by this concept that we've got this lovely new street accessing the station and the back of a building facing it. So we're still working through what the mixed use component of this looks like. But the housing project, Mercy Housing, open doors, very, very supportive.
Thank you. And this is just a case where your knowledge is going to be so much deeper than my own. And I would really trust the expertise of you and your staff in evaluating this better than I can based on the times we've talked about it. So I'll really look to you to help me form my own opinion. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric.
Tracy.
Thank you. So just to clarify, Dana, so you're saying that the back of the building is going to be on well, it's called College Way across the street. Is it going to still be called College Way when it's in front of this building? And is that College Way street actually going to be at the back of the building?
So here I am waving my mouse. You all cannot see my mouse. I just, sorry about that. I was like, I'm gonna point and no one's gonna see. 236 is what we are calling that. So it is opposite on the other side of Pack Highway of College Way. The new plan is kind of this shape. So it's at like an L and an L. So it's, I don't know how you describe that. This bottom piece of it where you're seeing the red now will have, I don't remember, the last drawing that I saw is like 1,500 square feet of retail that would face out onto 236. But the question is, then how do they load things in? What makes sense there? So the Sound Transit team is still working with Mercy Housing on refining what this will ultimately look like. But it's not as much. This is the place where I think where I'm frustrated, where we keep having it. It's not as much outward facing on that street as I think we would have hoped for. The idea of a transit-oriented development is both that it provides housing and services for people that live there, but that it also draws the public in, right? You want amenities for people getting off light rail, people coming to light rail, the community at large. And so that's sort of the place that we're still going back and forth. Sound Transit's still working on the term sheet on what that, requirements of that retail would look like. And we're also in continued conversations with Sound Transit about what the south property. So you see where 236 is, there's a white, that corner there that's still white that has a few trees on it. That's the south end of this TOD development, over even down further. So off of that development goes south. It's just white. Keep now, almost there. There you go. That piece of property is TOD South. And so we are trying to figure out, is there a way to, if we can't get the things that make a vibrant transit-oriented development on this north side, because the housing is the primary, then what does it look like to do something different on the south? But that's also ongoing conversations. Does that, Tracy, answer your question?
Yes, it did. I think, I'm a little bit with you. I know it's not on our side of the street. It's just like you said, I think we've spent so much invested to make this beautiful entry into the college, rename the street College Way, create this welcoming environment that if you get off, you want to feel like I'm here, I'm in a place. And if you only see the back of buildings, even if you put cafe lights up, you're still kind of like you're on a street instead of a place.
Yeah, and that's exactly why this first drawing was so hard, because if you can, the back of the community center was facing there where the buses are, where that entry into sort of developing that presence. So I have to say, Mercy Housing has been very responsive and taking sort of our feedback to heart, and I am optimistic we're going to get there, but also, that's part of what we're doing in this area with hopefully with that south piece is doing something that does create that more vibrant, welcoming. Here you can stop and grab a cup of coffee, or I don't know if people buy newspapers anymore, but what the things you would do that would draw you in to be there. So.
When Dana, that community center was an afterthought, if I recall correctly, anyway, because Mercy, while they do amazing housing, they are not in the business of building community centers or any of the other amenities. this was put on there as a requirement. And now, as you're saying, that has changed. So this is not the most up-to-date rendering of what that location will look like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that community, because we, in an effort, so one of the things that Kent was requesting was to create that space, that place, and so part of that was a separate building from the housing that was more community focused. So in an effort to meet that requirement, this community center was sort of just plopped down, did not have any plans, funding, or really anything that we felt would help make it viable. So they've moved some of that space into this new reconfiguration of the residential building, leaving a small portion of it as retail. And our hopes is that it does face that south 236, which is the same as the College Way on the other side.
Other questions before Claire continues? Okay, Claire.
All right, thank you. So as discussed, the project was awarded the RFP by Sound Transit to be located on this surplus land. And as Mayor Ralph mentioned, the terms of the development are forthcoming, and the final project is going to be different than described, and will definitely look different as well. So the project is a partnership between Mercy Housing Northwest and Open Doors for Multicultural Families. And that organization will provide support to the IDD households, and they will relocate their headquarters to the property. Open Doors for Multicultural Families will also operate the community center, which will include space for recreational activities and community-focused programming. And of the 199 units, 40 units will serve households up to 30% AMI, 44 units at 50% AMI, 100 units at 60% AMI, and 15 units at 80% AMI. And 39 units of households with an IDD up to 60% AMI are eligible for our SKHHP funds sourced from House Bill 1590. And SKHHP funds are requested for new building construction. And then talking a little bit about the funding recommendation. So the advisory board likes this project for several reasons, and recommended funding at $1 million in House Bill 1590 funds. The project has a 20% set aside for households with an IDD and serves a diverse range of incomes from 30% AMI to 80% AMI. The project proposal is thorough, seems well planned, and has funding commitments already established. The project's located adjacent to the future Kent Des Moines Link light rail station and has convenient access to transit, schools, medical clinics, grocery stores, and services. The project strongly aligns with SKHHP Housing Capital Fund adopted priorities, including being a transit-oriented development project, collaboration with local community-based organizations, addressing the needs of populations most disproportionately impacted by housing costs, advancing economic opportunity due to its proximity to the future Link light rail station and other amenities, advancing geographic equity of the Housing Capital Fund, and the leverage of private and public investment. And Mercy Housing Northwest is a well-established nonprofit developer in the region. And a third-party construction report found the proposed budget to be appropriate. So special conditions for this project include providing the funds in the form of a deferred contingent forgivable loan, that the funding commitment will last 36 months. I think it was last month that we talked about, is there a time limit on SKHHP funds? And I think I had said that we didn't have that in our guidelines, but that actually shows up in our special conditions here. Previously we have said it's 36 months. And so I'm using that here as well for all of the recommended projects this year. So use of the funds and population eligibility must be in alignment with RCW 8214-530. That's the RCW when we talk about HB 1590, that's the RCW we're talking about. And receipt of the documentation of remediation results and Department of Ecology approval of remediation efforts need to be submitted to SKIP prior to proceeding with construction. So that's Mercy Housing. We'll move on to Lehigh. So Skyway Affordable Housing and Early Learning Center is a multifamily rental project in unincorporated King County. The project will provide 55 total units for individuals and families, including 12 studios, 19 one-bedrooms, 13 two-bedrooms, and 11 three-bedroom units for households earning between 30 and 50% AMI, with a 75% set aside, that's 42 units, for households transitioning out of homelessness. So an early learning center will be located on the ground floor of the building, featuring 4 classrooms to accommodate up to 80 children, a parent resource room, and offices. The surrounding community will be prioritized in the early learning center activities, in addition to the tenants. Additional amenities include a community room, case manager offices, and a roof deck for resident use. Lehigh will provide on-site case management. And there was a follow-up email that we sent you after last month's meeting, responding to questions that came up about several of the projects. So wanted to make sure everyone saw those answers, since there was a question about the case management. The project has been previously awarded pre-development and acquisition funds from King County. The project will serve individuals, that's 25 units, and families, 17 units, exiting homelessness, earning 30% AMI, and will support general population households earning up to 50% AMI. A common room will support all the residents. So 42 units are eligible for SKIP funds sourced from House Bill 1590 revenue, and Child Haven, a nonprofit dedicated to strengthening families and preventing childhood trauma, plans to lease the Early Learning Center and relocate their program to the site, and will assist in applying for local funding for this portion of the project. The Early Learning Center will be financed separately from the residential space without using tax credits on the commercial space. So the advisory board appreciated this project for several reasons and recommended funding it at the requested 2.8 million amount. So there's a 75% set aside for households transitioning out of homelessness. The project brings quality, affordable housing to a historically underserved neighborhood and will house Child Haven on site to run the Early Learning Center. It's located near schools, a library, and a future community center. The project strongly aligns with SKHHP Housing Capital Fund adopted priorities, including collaboration with local community-based organizations, addressing the needs of populations most disproportionately impacted by housing costs, advancing geographic equity, the leverage of private and public investment, and promoting racial equity by prioritizing residents with a connection to the neighborhood. The project will prioritize, Lehigh is an established developer in the region, and a third-party construction report found the proposed budget to be appropriate. Special conditions include providing the funds in the form of a deferred contingent forgivable loan, that the funding commitment will last 36 months, and that the use of the funds and population eligibility must be in alignment with RCW 8214-530. And then the advisory board recommended that Lehigh should re-examine their guest policy, allowing only one guest at a time into the property to determine if it's necessary. And so I've talked with Lehigh, and they're open to that. So just for everyone's awareness. All right, so this TWG Pandean at Star Lake. So the south building of Pandean at Star Lake is a multifamily rental mixed-use project consisting of 168 affordable housing units for households earning between 30% and 60% AMI in Kent. The project is located adjacent to the Kent Star Lake Link light rail station. The transit-oriented development project will provide a mix of studio, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. The project will include ground floor commercial space consisting of an early learning center for low-income children and other nonprofit tenants. The property was purchased by the developer in December 2022. It's a 7-story building. It's a combination 4% and 9% low-income housing tax credit or LIHTC project. It's a combination, or it's a partnership between TWG Development and Vision House, with Vision House providing the on-site supportive services. And the 168 units include 109 units for the general population, 30 units for families with children, 25 units for families with children that require permanent supportive services and who are transitioning out of homelessness or are at risk of homelessness, and 4 units supporting households with an IDD requiring supportive services. SKHHP funds are requested for new building construction, and 29 units are eligible for our HB 1590 funds. So the advisory board liked this project for a few reasons and recommended funding at 1.17 million. They liked its convenient access to transit, schools, grocery stores, and services. It aligns strongly with SKHHP priorities, being a TOD project, collaboration with local community-based organizations, addressing the needs of populations most disproportionately impacted by housing costs, advancing economic opportunity, advancing geographic equity, and the leverage of private and public investment. The project construction date is anticipated by early 2026. That's about 6 months later than other recommended projects. So the sponsor may have more time to secure additional funds than other projects that we considered prior to beginning construction. The project has a strong partnership with Vision House, who will provide the on-site supportive services for 140 households. And they liked that the second building was supporting seniors earning 80% to 100% AMI. That's 173 units. But that project isn't part of the application to public funders. The project sponsor has been in close communication with the City of Kent on project feasibility and zoning requirements. And a third-party construction report found the proposed budget to be appropriate. And special conditions include providing the funds in the form of a deferred 1% interest, non-forgivable loan to the LIHTC partnership, that the funding commitment will last 36 months and must be in alignment with that same RCW that guides HB 1590. So this is our last recommended funding project. So Victorian Place 2 is a multifamily preservation 20-unit rental project in Des Moines. Since 1996, the nonprofit Multi-Service Center, or MSC, has owned the 2 adjacent buildings that comprise the project, which includes 5 units for households earning up to 30% AMI, 10 units for households up to 40% AMI, and 5 units for households up to 50% AMI. The 23-bedroom, 2-bath affordable rental units are in active use, and the target population is families with children. So the original request was for $500,000 in the form of a grant. Initial estimates were based on a 2018 construction estimate, and an updated cost estimate of the project received on October 25th totals $675,918. So SKHHP funds are requested to support the rehabilitation of the 2 buildings. This includes staircase repairs, installation of new railings, seal coating the parking lot, and more. So the advisory board recommended at this level this higher amount, and they like the project because there are limited funding resources. I think we talked about this last meeting, available for preservation and rehabilitation. The focus for larger public funders has historically been on creating new units of affordable housing, and smaller preservation projects like this one are not as competitive against larger preservation projects competing for the same funds. The property is in need of rehabilitation to support the health and safety of residents, which are families with children. And preservation is a high priority for SKIP. 75% of the households are earning no more than 40% AMI. It has good proximity to the future Kent Des Moines Link light rail station. Multi-Service Center is a well-established South King County-based nonprofit. It aligns strongly with Housing Capital Fund adopted priorities. So of the two applications submitted by the project sponsor by MSC, this project is the higher of the two priorities, as the larger housing units are more difficult for families in need to access, and the current safety concerns at the project site are more immediate. So special conditions include funding being in the form of a secured grant with no repayment. The funding commitment would last 36 months. The funding would be solely for the rehabilitation of the property with specific itemization included, unless otherwise agreed to by SKIP staff. And should cost overruns occur, whatever the board elects to support above and beyond what's adopted here, if anything at all, the sponsor will seek funds outside of SKIP. And then a quick thing on EcoThrive and our last MSC project. These are the two projects that did not receive a funding recommendation from the advisory board. So I'll just go quickly through them. Burien Cooperative Village is a 27-unit cottage homeownership project in Burien. The cottages will include 3 studios, 11 one-bedroom, and 13 two-bedroom units ranging in size from 320 square feet to 650 square feet, including 2 ADA accessible units. The cottages will be affordable to purchase for households earning an average of 50% AMI, not to exceed 60% AMI. Ownership will be through a limited equity cooperative. The project is designed to be climate adaptive. The project will include 12 duplex units, 3 standalone units, a common building, a playground, and on-site landscaping. The project was accepted into the City of Burien's Affordable Housing Demonstration Program by the Burien City Council. The land was purchased in 2023 using a loan from the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. So the advisory board chose not to recommend funding at this time for this project for several reasons. Though this is the second time the project sponsor has applied to SKIP for this project, and this year's application was much stronger than last year's, the proposal was missing key detailed budgetary information and demonstrated that the project may not be ready to proceed using SKIP funds at this time. So while homeownership is a high priority for SKIP, this project does not appear ready to move forward currently. So a major funding source also of the project relies on the timely adoption of the federal budget. And then SKIP funded 2 previous projects in Burien. Several detailed budget items missing from the proposal. I won't go through them, but those are detailed in your memo. So this is the other project not recommended for funding. The White River Apartments is a multifamily preservation 24-unit rental project in Auburn. The building was constructed in 1978. And MSC took ownership in 2000. The project consists of 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom units in active use, serving households, 3 units of households up to 30% AMI, 16 units at 45% AMI, and 5 units at 80% AMI. If SKIP funds were awarded, the project would transition the 80% AMI units to 60% AMI. And it's a rehab project, and the details of that are also included in your memo. So the reason the advisory board chose not to recommend funding at this time as a preservation project The proposal aligns with the priorities of SKIP, but limited eligible funding was available this round. And of the 2 proposals submitted by the project sponsor, the higher priority project identified by the project sponsor was recommended for full funding. This is a quick snapshot. This is required by our ILA to show you the allocated amounts by city for each project. So this is for the HB 1590 funds. So this is Covington and Kent's contribution. Thank you very much. And this is our Substitute House Bill 1406 contributions. So thank you to all those funding cities as well. And this is all included in your memo as well. So we would be presenting this to the city councils. And depending on the board's adopted recommendation today, if you choose to do different amounts, funding recommendations by project, that will adjust this table a little bit. And so if changes are made, I will adjust this to reflect those numbers. So with that, I have done a lot of talking. Let's hear from you.
Questions from anyone? Dana.
Thank you. More of an observation than a question. I was really hopeful on the Burien project because it was the only opportunity to fund ownership. And I think that's something that's really important to our jurisdictions. And I know we can't make the project be something that it's not or more ready. I just am frustrated that we're only seeing additional rental housing, which does not help set people up for long-term success or build any sort of generational wealth. So just wanted to say that out loud.
I certainly understand. Thank you. Colleen.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for that comment to Mayor Ralph. I think we were hoping as well, but I also understand the geographic equity issues at play and this element of readiness. So my question is, and I realize there's only 2 staff with SKIP, but I'm curious if there's opportunities to go back to folks that we don't fund, like EcoThrive and the other project with MSC, to give some consultation and to give some technical assistance to let them know what things were still questions by the advisory board and by the board, to help tee them up for possible future investments. Because I'm guessing that our concerns might be shared by other funders as well, and they probably could really use that feedback.
Yeah, so the plan is to share the third-party construction report that we received, that we based a lot of the information on about the level of readiness. My plan is to share that with the project sponsors so that they can see specifically what was missing that needs to be in that combined funders application. And this year, EcoThrive did not apply to other public funders in the region. So, there's that as well. But yes, I know I hear you.
Yeah, I think all of that's really good feedback about, just helping folks understand the competitive nature and what helps a project be more competitive, like bringing other fund sources to the table, as you just mentioned. So thank you for that. Thanks for hearing my comments.
Thank you, Colleen. Brian?
Thanks, Mayor. Just a question for Claire. Did the applications indicate the total project cost? I'm sorry if I missed that somewhere.
Yes, they did. And we reviewed that last meeting, and that information is in your most recent agenda packet.
Okay.
I put it, I think towards the back instead of mind, but if you don't see what you need there explicitly, it's very explicit in last month's agenda packet in the memo.
Okay, very good. I'll take a look at that. I apologize. I was running through the airport during the last meeting, trying to cast my vote whenever I heard something. So I will have to take a look at that. Just in case I drop off here, the Federal Way is not opposed to any of these projects, so long as the member jurisdictions are okay.
Thank you, Brian. Sonari.
Yeah, I just wanted to respond to some of the comments from my colleagues on the Burien project. One of the things that I was also thinking about when I saw that is that Skip's pretty new in the capital fund game to be the only public funder in a project. And I just think from a risk management standpoint, wanting to have, the county, the state, somebody else in there with us, for support, for closing, for asset management down the line, things like that are going to be really important as we look at this in the early years. I think as we get our feet under us, that may change and we're like, yes, we believe in this project and we want to go all in. But I think in these early days, looking to ourselves as a leverage partner makes a lot of sense.
And I'll just jump in and say, I agree as the administrator of the contracts. Yes, that was, I agree with that. And I should say, just to mention that we are of the advisory board's recommendations, we are the only funder for the preservation project that was recommended, but those contracts are going to be a lot more straightforward and different than construction contracts are.
Yeah, and that might be the only funder for the preservation component, but I would wonder if some of the rest of us have long-term contracts with that project. I don't know, from when it was originally constructed, potentially.
Yeah, I believe there's a covenant, I want to say with King County or Department of Commerce.
Yeah, we can look that up if you want to know.
And Dana, I've got a message here that ownership projects would or will be considerably easier to fund if we can get legislature to amend House Bill 1406 eligibility to include households earning up to 80% AMI for affordable ownership. Bill sponsors will be confirmed by the end of the month. So we'll know a little bit more then, and we can get on board with that.
Super hopeful. I saw some conversation back and forth about that earlier in the week, that's a possibility. So definitely
would be great
of that. It's a huge gap in our ability to get people into housing, and
that kind of
vicious cycle that we're tying people into just paying rent for their whole lifetime.
Agree. That type of housing legislation I can get behind. It's every year adding more before we know what the impacts are of the legislation from the year before or 2 years before that I struggle with. But being able to
response was exactly the same as that. This would be great, and this is the kind of thing that we want, right?
Yes. Okay. Any other comments or questions from the funding opportunities that we have in front of us?
I guess maybe I'll just assume, but I thought I'd just say for the record that King County supports the Lehigh Skyway project. We already have dollars in it for the acquisition that we've actually already paid out. So
thank you for that, Sonari. Dana?
Sorry, one more thing. I think it's important to put out on the record, we had some public comment earlier indicating that there was zero support to schools for any of these projects. And I can speak for Kent, and I'm pretty sure it's everywhere. There is absolutely pass-through funding that goes to the schools anytime we've got new construction, the impact fees. The one point I would agree on is the support for law enforcement, but we're also trying to change that with this legislative session. So, but there is money and there is consideration that goes to the public schools. So can't, speak to all of the points, but at least that one there is some funding.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Claire, I believe you're looking for a motion on this if we are ready to do so, correct?
I am, and I would ask for consideration to fund that contingency amount for the preservation project because that was missing in their line item budget. And that sounds like something that is really crucial to have.
And that's part of the recommendation, correct?
So that actually came after the advisory board
Okay.
Made their recommendation. So they did not have that information at the time. And so this was kind of a last minute find. And I think it was even after the agenda for this was
I was gonna
published.
say it's after the agendas were published because the motion does not address what you just stated. Just want to make sure. Okay, so is there, if there is no other discussion, is there a motion to approve and amend funding recommendations as presented and also as not just as recommended, but as presented for the contingency in the project today?
Absolutely, so moved. This is Tracy.
Thank you. There's a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of approving the funding recommendation as presented today with the contingency and forward the recommendation to member city councils for approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Somebody just sneezed down our hallway. I'll take that as another aye. All opposed, please say no. The motion passes. Congratulations again, and thank you all. My goodness, that's a lot of money we just voted on. I am really, really excited and very proud of the work. And Claire, Dorsal, the advisory committee, the working staff group, everyone involved in this. It's just so exciting that we are on this journey and we're doing it together, and the dollars really make a difference. So thank you. All right. We will move on to the 2023 third quarter progress report, and Claire is going to provide that to us, which, as we know, is required by our interlocal agreement that we do receive this information. So Claire, please take it away.
Thank you. And I do see that we only have 10 minutes left.
Yes.
If you look under announcements, there's a lot of announcements.
There are.
So I am just going to breeze through this at a very high level, if that is okay with everyone. But essentially, you know, the last 3 months, well, quarter three makes up July through September. This was a time of action and shared vision among us all. We saw City of Kent and City of Covington step up and pool their House Bill 1590 funds, which quadrupled the amount of funding we were able to provide for affordable housing. Just so exciting. And you all just made your recommendation for the second annual funding round. So all very exciting stuff. But we have been busy. A couple things I want to highlight is the advisory board recruitment. So Dorsal's been hard at work connecting with over 40 interested candidates. And we have interviews scheduled for next month. And we're hoping to bring forward some candidates for your consideration in January. The Housing Capital Fund has been taking up a lot of our time and capacity, but it is all worth it through helping pool those new sources of revenue, running all the logistics of the Housing Capital Fund, developing those contract documents. It's a lot of work. So you'll see that showing up here. We started some of those preservation strategy conversations, and that work does continue behind the scenes. And then we met with Congressman Adam Smith to advocate for South King County affordable housing needs. And then you heard a lot about the HUD Pro Housing Grant that we collaborated with King County and Arch on. And then you heard a few executive board briefings here at the executive board level. And just a quick look at the budget. One thing I want to highlight, the only thing that will look different from last time is going to be a higher interest earnings number. That is good news for us. And we actually have a higher beginning fund balance number as well. So this is because the budgeted number that you all adopted last year in spring was a conservative estimate, I would say. And because of high inflation rates and the fact that our program coordinators started at a later time than anticipated and budgeted, this is showing up as a higher number than we had before. And this is the official beginning fund balance that we now have that just came out recently. So that's good news for us as well. So our estimated ending fund balance in the operating account is $426,000. Housing Capital Fund, this should all look the same. Those House Bill 1590 funds are going to show up for Q4. And you should be seeing some expenditures at that point as well from our first funded project through the Housing Capital Fund. And with that, happy to take any questions. And as a reminder, I'll share this with our staff work group, who will then distribute it to your jurisdictions, however works best for you all.
Thank you. Sonari.
Yeah, I came across this the other day and I had forgotten that the legislature had done this, but they put in a new allowance for administrative expenses from 1406 funds. And I was just wondering if we were tracking that and if any of those dollars were available to skip, or if the cities had retained it, or if there was complicating factors because it says the city or county may keep it. I don't know. I was just curious if that was in our calculus.
So in this budget picture, it's not a part of that, though I think it is a conversation for future budget years and how we allocate our housing capital funds. But yeah, I think it is an option for Skip to pursue that.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? All right. Well, since we have so many items in the updates and announcements, we are only 5 minutes behind schedule now, Claire. So let's move on. First item on there is chair and vice chair nominations for 2024.
Yeah, so if you're interested in serving as chair, vice chair for next year, or would like to nominate someone to serve in either of these roles, if you could email me by Tuesday, January 2nd, that would be wonderful. And the goal is to elect a chair and vice chair at the January 17th meeting. Excuse me.
Thank you. All right, December skip meeting. Or are you saying skip the December meeting?
Oh, I love it. I love it. Yeah, so because you all were so efficient today in your recommendation for funding, your reward is that we will be canceling the December skip meeting. So to give you just a quick break. So yes, we'll cancel that meeting on your calendars.
And that is certainly no indication that I do not like spending time with y'all on a Friday afternoon. But at that time of the year, I'm sure we all have other items that could take a priority over spending this time together. So thank you, Claire.
And yes, we did orchestrate everything this year in order to be able to cancel that December meeting for you, because I heard that that would be much appreciated. So, and then I have a couple more. So, and end of year check-ins, I sent an email to most of you about connecting for the end of the year, and I look forward to those meetings. I already have scheduled some of them as early as next week. So if you haven't gotten back to me, please email me. Let me know what works for you. Then the 2024 meeting schedule. So this is included in your agenda packet. It shows the, assuming we're keeping that third Friday at 1 p.m. slot. So those dates are included. If there's any concerns or issues, let us know. Otherwise, we'll put those on your calendar. So I assume there's no issues. So we'll probably do that in December sometime for your awareness. And then a quick note. So Hannah Bond-Miller has moved, transitioned roles and jurisdictions, and is sadly outside South King County now. So she has been a part of our staff work group and serving as an alternate for the city of Renton since SKIP's founding, I think. So I've truly appreciated her collaboration and support in this year that I've been here. And so a big shout out and thank you to Hannah. And then Tukwila, Tukwila's council president, Delastrinos Johnson, this is her last meeting since she chose not to run for re-election in her seat. So I just want to take a moment and thank her for her service to SKIP and her community. And it's been a pleasure working with you. And I hope that your support for affordable housing in South King County continues in your civilian life. Don't forget about us. So thank you, and would just love to take a moment if others would like to chime in and say anything, please feel free.
Anyone else?
Just want to say thank you to Cynthia for your work and commitment to this group over the last year or so. We've been really grateful for what you brought to the conversation. We're going to miss you, and big decision to not do this stuff anymore, but best of luck.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thank you to Chair Bacchus, to Vice Chair Ralph, to Claire, to Dorsal, to all of my colleagues here. This has been a really great group to work with. It's been amazing to be able to be a part of the first 2 cycles of funding through SKIP. I love being able to provide my council with updates. I know there were council members who participated in the creation of SKIP. So to hear, from creation to where we are now has really been awesome. And I promise to find a good replacement. The city of Tukwila is committed to the work that we're doing here on SKIP. And so I don't think it's going to be a problem finding somebody who is just as passionate about the work and who can work with all of you to move this work forward in our region. So thank you all for all that you do. Yeah, it's been an honor to serve with you all.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. You are such an advocate for this work and for your entire community. They are better for you having served. I know that you have great things in front of you, but I hope Tukwila understands what they are losing with you leaving office. You are a tireless advocate, and we are so appreciative. I am myself, as well as this organization, for all of the work that you have done and your continued support. We wish you great success in everything that you do, and maybe you'll come back and visit us at some point. All right. Anything else? Anyone else for the good of the order? Well, I hope for those of you that are celebrating Thanksgiving next week, that you are surrounded by those that you love and want to be around, and that you are nourished by the friendship and families that you have, as well as the type of work that you are doing, and that you are fulfilled and you enjoy the day and count your blessings, as I will mine. Thank you very much for all that you do. Until we see each other again, have a wonderful time and happy Thanksgiving.
You know.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, Mayor.